Right, so we'll go ahead and get started. So today's conversation is going to be talking about specially designed instruction, and then we're going to talk specifically about explicit instruction. So we have our team here that just spent a little bit of time talking about instruction, and you'll see on the screen we've shared with you just a few PowerPoint slides about from some of the thinking from John O'Connor, who is the author of Great Instruction, Great Achievement. So we're going to talk a little bit about instruction through the lens of a special educator, talking about specially designed instruction, and then what that looks like both in the regular ed setting and in the special ed classroom. Anybody got anything they want to talk about right here? We're going to just kind of move through the slides that we have, and we'll just talk a little bit about specially designed instruction and where it came from and kind of the history of that. Is there anything you want to say, either Brenda or Denny Paul, about specially designed instruction?
Well, special education started many, many decades ago. As you can see, it says 1975. It was called Education for All Handicapped Children. And in that, it began our special designed instruction that we had to do for all the students with disabilities. And we had to make it unique to each student. Not just a cookie cutter specially designed instruction for all kids, but we had to make it unique for all students with disabilities.
As we get started, we just want to make sure that each of you know, if all you have to do, if you want to ask a question or be part of the conversation, we invite you to just to join in. Just click in on from your computer and join us and ask questions, or just add something that you have a perspective or some information that you would like to share. So this slide, really just gives us about the history of what we're talking about with specially designed instruction. Because we know that we use that language all the time, but do we really understand what specially designed instruction is? So we'll move on to the next slide. Don O'Connor talks about good instruction.
Right. Great achievement. Up and down.
We'll talk about a list. He says, come up with 6 things you think of. Designed instruction. And so
you're doing it.
These are just some things that came from some of those conversations that
up and down.
What Randy said, being specific to the student.
We're doing it.
Instruction is designed for that individual student.
I want
to know. We think about the needs of each individual student with disability, because some of them may have strengths in different areas, and we want to really tailor what we do with specially designed instruction to that individual student. We also want to make sure that the strategies that we use have some evidence behind them, that there is some validation, that we're not just selecting something because it's a fun activity, but that there's some research behind it saying, yes, we do know that there's a link between the research and this particular strategy for helping students with disabilities. The other thing is how the SDI is described in the IEP, and I don't know if Dee, Paul, Brenda have anything you want to talk about. In the IEP, we talk about SDI.
Well, it's what the teacher does differently and more intensely for the students with disabilities. All students should get quality core instruction all the time. Then when you have co-teaching situations or you have pull-out situations, then you would have specially designed instruction that adapts the content and the methodology, the activities, and it has research.
Every day.
You go about looking at that in terms of how you're going to provide that to the student, and then how you're going to assess it. You're going to assess that to be able to give them feedback and have them engaged. So those are all key pieces to special design instruction. But really, in one simple way of putting it, it's simply what the teacher does differently for the student that they're not getting in the regular classroom in the core instruction.
Okay. So that's a good explanation about that. What the teachers are doing differently for that student. Again, based on that unique need of that student, based on data that we have about the students' areas of strength or areas that they need for improvement.
And we also have, when you're looking at that IEP, it's not the goal. You have to write the goal, and then you have to write down what specially designed instruction that you're going to use for that specific goal. Vinnie Paul and I have done several record reviews and found that a lot of the SDI that's listed does not match the goal. So one thing that you can use is the document, and it's an older document. It's February the 14th. It's not a schoolhouse document, but it's actually the IEP and Lesson Plan Development Handbook. It does have SDI in it as well as SAS, Supplementary Aids and Services. So that's one of the pieces that you can have, and Dion's going to upload it into the Google so that you will have that. But again, like I said, it's a 2014 document, and I don't know when the next one's going to be out.
But it does have, so that's a helpful tool when you're thinking about special instruction, because it has very specific skills listed in there for literacy, math, and for behavior. So if you're working on developing an IEP and you're trying to think about what specially designed instruction would be appropriate for that student, then you can use that tool. It gives you also highlighted that it gives you some ideas about some functional skills as well. So really, if you're developing an IEP and you're kind of stuck on thinking about what it is that you want to include in that IEP, it gives you some real good guidance on that. So again, we'll have that linked up to the Zoom document. And at the end of this Zoom session, I'll take you guys to our link on the holler and let you guys see. We're archiving all the Zoom meetings, all the PowerPoints, videos that all of us have been part of here at KVEC developing, and so we'll have access to all these documents. You'll have access to this PowerPoint, and it's got a voiceover, so you can listen to the voiceover PowerPoint, or you can go back and listen to the whole Zoom meeting. But anyway, the last thing then, a couple of things. We're talking about how we're helping students meet those standards. And so we're thinking about with specially designed instruction, what is the supports that we're giving the students? We have to think about ultimately standard, and then how do we backward design our instruction to support their learning, and what kind of specially designed instruction do we provide for that student to help move them toward that grade level standard and being able to be proficient at that. The other thing is some other things of what is it, how do we offer the content, what is the method or the delivery of instruction that we use that's specially designed for that individual student. Your comments at this time?
Don't see the stupid shows.
Does anybody have any questions? Welcome to those of you guys who are just joining in. You'll be able to go back and catch the beginning of our session after we've archived the video conference. If you don't have any questions at this time, just let me know.
Essay.
Questions?
Essay.
All right, so this is now just talking about what is expected of teachers when we think about specially designed instruction. And again, this comes a lot of this is pulled from the work of John O'Connor. But let's just talk about that expectation for teachers. You know, we know that we have to give that individualized instruction where we meet the unique needs of all of them. But we may have a caseload of 15 students on our caseload, and all or depending on what grade level we teach, may have or they will have very unique needs. So we have to consider how we're looking at that specially designed instruction, how we're going to execute that based on who's in our caseload and what the needs of those students are. So one of the things that we have to think about is that as teachers and as special ed teachers, we have to really understand the needs of each one of our students, and that is pretty intricate. It's a lot for us to understand and to be able to understand and figure out a way to deliver that instruction. So that's what specially designed instruction is, and where to go find resources when we need them, just like what Rita was talking about with the IEP lesson plan, the IEP and lesson plan document, because it gives us some very specific ideas about specially designed instruction.
You know, one of the things that John O'Connor talked about in his book kind of hits this idea of what's expected of teachers. We kind of know that each year, as we become more and more experienced, we kind of know what kind of problems we're going to face. There's a group of problems that are kind of consistent with students with disabilities. We know there are going to be some deficiencies in reading. We know there's going to be, within that, there's going to be problems with fluency. There's going to be problems with comprehension. We know that they're going to have problems with operations and that direction.
He twisted over for power. Why?
When you're anticipating those kinds of things, one of the things that John O'Connor suggests is preloaded strategy.
You can do that for my room.
Those strategies, and you know what strategy matches what problem. And so, in preparation for your upcoming year or your caseload, maybe you do some work around those strategies that are going to meet those needs that you know are for sure going to be there, and then you'll better be able to handle those unique needs in your caseload where a disability is a little different and a little more challenging, and you'll have to spend a little more time with that. But you'll have those preloaded research-based practices tailored to small groups ready to go.
And that is one way we can really get to if we kind of build a strategy or strong effective strategies, then we know where to pull from immediately. Kids struggling with comprehension, we know what strategies to pull to help them with comprehension, or just like Dan Paul said, whatever it is that area, or if it's behavior, then we know behavioral extension strategies, behavioral strategies. Research-based instruction has general ed sectors. So we have to think about that core instruction and what we do in addition to that core instruction to support students. Also, we have to also remember that we've got compliance and a lot of other responsibilities. So that's like Dave was talking about. We just got to have a good balance between, kind of building our toolbox of tools that are evidence-based practices that we know are helpful, and that way we can just quickly pull that tool out, use that tool, because we do have lots of responsibilities, and we want to make sure that we can meet the needs. You got any questions at this point? So this is some of the other things that John O'Connor says about specially designed instruction. Does anybody want to talk about this one, or you want to just?
Yeah, just that statement there, drastically increase practice turns and feedback. Engagement is a huge piece when you're talking about learning to be true. We talk a lot about practice. This kind of goes hand in hand with Anita Archer.
There's one last thing. He rewrote his contract.
And it also is one of those things that once you drastically increase, find ways to get response from students. You are working with them from bell to bell, and you're giving them immediate feedback on the practice turns they're taking. The more practice they get, and the more feedback they get from the teacher in the classroom, this research says that the learning is going to go up, the achievement gap is going to close. So that's what I had to say about that.
Good. So let's take just a second. So those of you that are participating, let's hear from you guys some of the ideas. What are some of the things that you can think of will give us an opportunity for more practice and for some more small group or individual feedback? Something you're already doing.
Second that one off.
So just think about it in this terms. Think about what your list of what you think special design instruction is, and then kind of compare it to what John O'Connor says here.
I can't do that.
We'll kind of talk about it.
Do that?
So And guys, if you don't care, I think we're getting a little bit of interference. If each of you don't care for just a second to check to see if your mic is muted, and then you can just unmute it when you get your turn to speak. I think we're having a little bit of sound issue. If you don't care, please check your microphone and make sure it's muted. Everybody check their microphone, please. Just double check, make sure you're muted. All right, let's got it. Can everybody hear okay? Autumn, I see you clicked on mute. Can you hear okay?
Yes, I can hear.
Okay, all right. Thank you. All right. So again, I think we got it. So if you when you speak, you just have to unmute, and it should work fine. Sometimes we just get a little feedback when we do the meeting, so that's what happens. Do I have any comments or questions at this point? Then we'll go ahead and keep on going. Again, this is what John O'Connor says about you want to make sure there's a lot of opportunity to practice instruction, and that we give them feedback pretty quickly. It's either affirmative or corrective feedback. We want to make sure if they're doing it, and that we give them some feedback on how well they're doing. That gives us a chance to really check to see if they're mastering that skill as they're working on it, or if they're learning something incorrect. All right, do that informative assessment. But when we think about doing practice turns, we can shift the way we do practice turns, and rather than it being, in a classroom when you're calling on one or two students all the time, because those students are generally the ones that answer the questions. Right? They always answer the questions. They always have their hand raised. But let's say that we want to have all students in that class that are engaged in the feedback or engaged in giving a response. That's when you might use a whiteboard, for instance. And you may ask the question about how to solve a math problem. And then you have all students solve the problem and hold their board up simultaneously. That way you can more quickly assess, did every student get it? So sometimes you'll have and you have everybody. Sometimes you have all kids do a written response. Sometimes you have all kids do an action response. I have saying it out loud, just talking back and forth to a partner. So when we think about our instruction, we want to make sure that we give our special ed kids as many opportunities to practice how to solve a problem and give them feedback, because they're going to need more for practice, even more than our regular ed kids. Another thing is we have to deliver explicit instruction. So our next slide is going to be about what is explicit instruction? What does that look like in the classroom? You also have to give some pretty explicit vocabulary instruction. And I can tell you guys, when I worked on IEPs, sometimes I'd be thinking about what kind of special design instruction I might provide for a student. And I didn't really understand, on that menu you look and see, drop down menu about what kind of special design instruction you have. You might have paired, echo, and choral. Well, I may have used those as one of those SDI strategies for my students, but I don't know that I have enough time to really understand what that is. That's one of the things we want to really understand what SDI is and what that looks like. Back in just a second. Let's talk about explicit instruction. So we got a team. We can talk just a little bit about explicit instruction. What explicit instruction is. That's where it comes from Dr. Anita Archer. He has a model that explicit instruction is the I do it, we do it, you do it model for delivering instruction. So if you're introducing or teaching a skill, and especially for our special ed kids, if they have a skill deficit, then we are going to really focus on that skill, and we want to explicitly teach what that skill is. And about what that means, the first one is about how we focus on critical content. And as special ed teachers, we have to figure out what's the big thing that a kid needs to do. Let's say I have a fourth grade student that has an IEP that reads on the first grade level. I have to look at what the standards say that fourth grade student needs to be able to do. And then I have to figure out what skills are the most important for a kid. So I have to figure out what that is. Maybe it's in literacy, it's inferencing. I have to figure out how to teach that kid those strategies for being able to infer. Well, I may have to back up some grade levels and look and see That's what it means by figuring out what that critical content is. So you have to figure out what's the most important skill that kid needs to be able to do in order to meet that grade level standard. That's the same way if you're writing an AP goal, right?
It's exactly. Achievement test, and you get into an area where you're going to identify that there's a problem in reading comprehension. But what exactly is it? What's exactly the problem? Is it, what's the barrier?
Yeah.
And then you look at the discrete skills around, is it fluency? Right. Is it phonemic awareness? Is it being able to sound the words out? Is it something else? What is the discrete skill that emerges from that reading instruction in those 5 strands of reading that are going to be the one that we prioritize? Because when you're doing an IEP, you have to think in terms of what's going to get me closer to similar grade performance the soonest. What are we going to be able to do that's going to be huge for that student, and that they are removing them as quickly as we can,
right,
to get to close the achievement gap.
So, and that's really what we're trying to think about. How do we get them there? So we talk about how we focus on that, but it's that's a pretty hard skill for us to learn, even as special educators. We have to figure out what those most important skills are, and then how we're going to teach those. And so you'll see that next bulleted item on this slide is about how we sequence those skills. How do we put them in order? And that's how we can use the Kentucky Academic Standards. We can look at the standards, and so again, I'm using my 4th grade student that's having issues with reading comprehension. So I'm going to take a look at those standards, and all those standards are designed to getting him to reading on that grade level, 4th grade level. So what is it that he is missing in that to be able to get to that standard? So I go back and I look at those standards. I may use it as a progression, right? I see what the skills that he had to have the mastery with grade before, so I might look and see what 3rd grade requires. I might look and see what it looks like at 2nd grade. I might look at and see what it is at 1st grade. And that's what's going to lead me to design my instruction in a logical manner to get him or her to that grade level. And that's when I have to figure out how to chunk things. And I'll give an example, like for inferencing for 4th grade. But in the 2nd grade, you ask questions like who, what, when, where, and why. So before my student can be able to infer, he's going to have to be able to answer who, what, when, where, and why questions from a piece of text. So then that tells me what I have to teach that student. I'm going to have to teach them how to do that part first. Then I'm going to have to look and see what they have to do at 3rd grade level. Then inferencing at 4th grade. So that's why it's important that you think about the grade level you teach. Take a look at the Kentucky Academic Standards and try to really pinpoint what those big pieces of that critical content is that kids have to be able to do. And we know inferencing is one.
And this might be a good point to mention before we talk about the revised standards where they have that progression.
Mm-hmm.
It has if you look at the grade level that you're teaching or working with, then it has the grade below it and then the grade ahead of it side by side, so that it keeps you from flipping through the different grade levels, so that the standards that match up to that. So that progression in those standards will help you see what they need to know prior to getting to that grade level.
And that's right. So if you've got a kid with a goal, a reading goal, so if it's reading comprehension, you're going to be able to go in there and look at those standards and see what those skills are for reading comprehension. Basic reading, those skills are found in the foundational standards in the Kentucky Academic Standards. So if those kids have basic reading deficit, go to the Kentucky Academic Standards. Look and see what that looks like for those different grade levels. Look based on the data you have for your student about what grade level they're performing on. You're considering a year out where you're trying to get them, and then you take a look at what those standards say, and you figure out how then you're going to give your instruction to get that kid to that standard, that grade level standard. So that gives you some direction. It really kind of gives you a map about how you move kids toward mastery of that particular skill. And so, just having a conversation about that, pulling up the Kentucky Academic Standards for the grade level that you're teaching, and you may have a grade band, you may have, K1 and 2 or 3, 4, and 5. But look at those standards for that grade level band and see what those standards are expecting of that student, and then you know where your kid is at and then how to design those lessons. But that's why it has to be explicit. It's because we got a lot of ground to cover, and we want to maximize every single minute that we have with students when we deliver instruction. And that's why it takes you to that fourth bulleted item was about how we design our lessons. They've got to be organized and designed that they're very intentional, that we really don't miss a piece of that we get kids, we give them that instruction and move them as far as we can.
One of the key pieces too, I think, is making sure that we have clear expectations. We give them concise language that explicitly states what it is that they're going to be learning, and that we look at their prior knowledge and we try to activate that prior knowledge, get them involved and provide a hook for them. And then as we move through that, then we're looking at, okay, now we've shown you, and for students with disabilities, we have to show them more than once. Anita Archer refers to it, I do 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 it. Then we do it, we do it, we do it, we do it. And then it takes you a long time to get to you do it. And so certainly that's something to think about. And then, John O'Connor kind of weaves that back in with us as he talks a lot about increasing the number of practice turns and the amount of feedback that you get. So with anything you're doing, whether it be learning to dance, learning to shoot a basketball, or learning to read, the more you practice it and the more you get corrective feedback that's good, solid feedback from someone a teacher who knows more about that subject, then the research says that the more practice turns and feedback that you have, the more chances you have for repetition, for skill repetition, and Anita Archer refers to it as skill and drill and skill and thrill. But absolutely, that is the crux of what we're doing with teaching students with disabilities. This is the intensity that we talk about in specially designed instruction. This is where the intensity comes in. So you tie these things together and you say, hey, this is a little more than what you would get in that core instruction. That's right. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it really is the crux, the model, and then how do you go and practice that? So one of the examples that John O'Connor provided for us in those trainings was that you would have a student with you had just talked about several words, vocabulary words, and then you had one student that had listened to that, and you had another student that had listened to that, ones and twos, if you will, with Anita Archer, and you've got that student with his back to those words up there, and then you've got the student that's describing those words. So they're getting practice with those vocabulary words. They're defining those vocabulary words. They can't say the vocabulary word. It's kind of like playing that little game that we play. And so that is an opportunity to just practice their knowledge, find out what they know about those vocabulary words, and see if the other person can identify the vocabulary word. So that's an opportunity just to do that kind of activity, and provide that practice that really hooks in with that.
Yeah, that's good. Mm-hmm. So one of the things we can do is part of the training we do on explicit instruction, we've got a little video that we can link, and when we finish today, I will add this into our document, and I'll give you guys access to a couple of video lessons that Anita Archer is using to teach. One is a vocabulary lesson for a third grade reading, And then there's another example of an 8th grade geometry. And those are free on YouTube. You can just go on YouTube and Google Anita Archer lessons, and you can go and watch all kinds of lessons that she models how to actually use this explicit instruction model. Because this is, several days of training, but we just want to kind of give you an idea about what is explicit instruction and what's the framework for that. And just like Neepa said, it's the I do it, we do it, you do it model. But we have to, the I do it part might be that you have to do 10 models or examples for students. But not only we model it, but we use examples and we use non-examples. And we model that, and then we give kids opportunity to practice. And then if they're not getting it, then we go back and do some more examples or some more non-examples. And then we let them go back and practice again. And you continue that until you have mastery. And you don't just stop then when you have them practice content, you kind of go back and revisit it. You go back and you do some practice opportunities. At the end of the week, you may have, a little trivia game. And you go back and answer questions, or you have some mixed practice math problems so that you're using the work that you done this week, but then 2 weeks ago you worked on PEMDAS in math. So you're going to have embedded in your practice on Friday is some activities on PEMDAS, and then you're doing part of your geometry work that you're working on, or whatever it is. But that we just make sure we embed opportunities for them to go back and practice more and more, because our students have more trouble retaining that, right? They're going to have trouble with retention with holding things in their short-term memory, or they may have, it's going to take them. They have a slower processing speed. They're going to need multiple opportunities to engage in that work in order to get that.
And Dion, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's one of the things I wanted to talk to our teachers about is how much of an emphasis both Anita Archer and John O'Connor placed on retrieval of information from a blank slate, and how that really impacts learning and making learning permanent for our students, and really building those connections for students that may have problems with processing, may have problems with short-term memory, long-term memory. But actually having them pull and practice from a lesson some answers and getting it down on paper, or getting a response from the student based on retrieving information from not having anything in front of you, just a blank slate, and going from class to class and maybe having it, as a bell ringer, and saying, what did you learn in the last class? Write down 3 things you learned in that last class, and having them really work on retrieving information from a blank slate, and really actually instructing them on how to do that, and having them reflect on what they've learned. You get, one of the things we were having a conversation earlier about reflection. Reflection is so important for our students with disabilities, because they really have a hard time reflecting on what they've learned. And you teach them explicitly to do that, to respond to one another, to write things down. And you really teach them then as they're processing what they've learned and responding about it, then the learning is becoming more permanent.
Absolutely.
And really, that's right. That's how they get it. That's how over time they're going to be able to retain it.
And then I can go on and say the key piece beyond that then is checking for that understanding. That gives us an opportunity to check. One of the things I hear all the time, Brenda and I, as we travel the roads, we hear, where do I get baseline from? Where I don't have time to do that collection. Okay, but if you're really working on getting response up, you're getting practice terms and feedback up, you're getting multiple opportunities to collect. If you're teaching them to reflect, you're getting multiple sources of data in a lesson, in one class. If the engagement is at a high level and you're getting tons of practice terms and tons of opportunities to give feedback, and then you're going to have tons of time to take data.
Right.
And then you're going to be able to use that data, capture it when you need to capture it, and it's going to inform your instruction from that point on it, whether or not the student is actually getting it.
Yeah.
And that's what the purpose of progress monitoring is.
That's right. And that's a good point. It's all really connected. It's all connected. It's all part of the work that we do. It's about how do we use the data to figure out where kids are at? How do we teach them? Do we develop a goal? How do we teach them? And how do we monitor the progress towards that? So it's really all relevant to the work we do every single day. But part of that is how do we design and deliver instruction using a model that's an evidence-based practice in order to monitor a student's progress. So it just comes back full circle again. And then we say, did they make progress? Did they not make progress? Then we either change our instruction, we change our practice. We may have to use a different skill or strategy. We may have to use a different strategy for that skill, and that's what teaches us how to change our instruction. It gives us the mechanisms we need for making decisions about how to help that kid more closely or better, how to really tailor what we're doing for that kid. And so you'll see on this slide, it's the same kind of thing about it. One of the things with explicit instruction is, so as you're modeling, you're doing a think aloud. Maybe you're modeling and you're doing a think aloud about a book. And you're thinking, maybe you're trying about inferencing, and you're talking as a teacher and you're modeling that lesson, and you're thinking, okay, well, maybe this really is what the author meant, or maybe this is what he's meaning. He might not come right out and say it out loud, but he's kind of making us, as the reader, he's giving us clues. And we use that, so that's what we use to infer that this is happening in the book, right? So you're just thinking aloud. It's that whole metacognitive, you're talking about how you're thinking something through, and kids get to see that, because our special ed kids really can't see that. They don't see how they can go through that process. They have a hard time, planning for a writing. So you give them a writing prompt, they have the hardest time, and you guys know as well as I do how that is. You give a kid a writing prompt, and unless they've got some kind of structure to organize their thinking, they struggle. And our students struggle even more. Our general ed students struggle sometimes, but our special ed students struggle even more because they don't know that structure or that organization. So part of that explicit instruction is really teaching them how to think through that. And so as you're doing that, you're giving them examples. So then you start giving them, here's an example, or this is a non-example. And you let them make the decision if it's a non-example or an example, so that kids can kind of start discerning between what it really is or what it is not. And again, that leads us right back to thinking about Marzano's work. And the number one, the highest yield instructional strategy we can have is identifying similarities and differences. So when kids can do examples and non-examples, that's really what we're talking about. Do they fully understand the concept and they know what it is and what it is not? And that's what we're talking about, that high instructional. That yields the highest gain. So it's all, again, connected back to that evidence-based practice and how we can make sure that we're getting the most effective practices to our kids to helping them, because we have the kids who need it the most. And then we move into that guided and supported practice. So we're going to give them some guided practice. We're going to give them some examples and then give them some feedback. But we have kids responding. And so one of the biggest things is, I said before, was Dr. Archer was talking about, if you just let a kid, you have the same kid answering the question all the time, the rest of the class is checking out. They don't have to worry about answering it because somebody else is going to answer the question. So when you have all kids respond, and that's why I said whiteboards, they have a written response, they write the answer down and I turn and talk to my partner. But if we always can try to embed some of those activities where every kid has to respond in some way. If it's thumbs up, thumbs down, if it's a 1, 2, 3, whatever it is that you use in your classroom, just have all kids. And that gives you that formative assessment, like Nicole was talking about. That's how we make progress monitoring happen in a classroom setting. That's how that it's not an isolated event, but that we're continuously monitoring progress toward a student's goal. You agree?
That's exactly what I was getting at.
Yeah, and so anyway, so you'll see.
And the research says that if you're in a co-teaching situation, these types of things can't happen when you're teaching a large group.
Right.
So if there's 2 adults in there, then there should be kind of like parallel teaching going on. Put them in groups of 6 or 7, 8 or 9, and what happens is the feedback goes up.
Yep.
The practice turns go up.
Yep.
The smaller the group, but around 6 or 7 is as small as you want to get with a small group.
Mm-hmm.
So the research suggests that the learning really ramps up when you have the opportunity for having small groups and maybe station teaching or parallel teaching in a co-teaching situation, or in a small group of 6 to 7, where learning is really, really going to be ramped up because you're going to have more practice, more feedback, more opportunity to collect data, more data to inform your instruction, and then that cycle continues. And so that's,
And that's a good point, and that's what John O'Connor said. He said, if we're co-teaching, we're not really co-teaching unless both of those teachers in that classroom, the regular ed and the special ed teachers, are working with those groups of students. And so if you think about that, that's how we maximize that learning in that classroom, that both people are leading instruction, or leading small group instruction, or we're giving kids opportunity just for more practice. And rather than, taking home and doing 100 problems, how can we get them doing that work there where we can give them that guidance and support as they go along? So they're not learning something incorrectly and keep doing it over and over. Right. So anyway, that's just something to think about. Again, these are just some bulleted items about explicit instruction. We also have a video that's linked, and hopefully at the end of the session today, I'll send you guys this link, and you guys should be able to go back and see what we've done so far, have access to our PowerPoints, and our Brenda and Deepaul have done some other videos on, we included them on one on specially designed instruction, right?
We're doing an entire series on the IEP guidance document.
Yeah.
We're breaking it down into small sections, small chunks, and just doing topical things like FAPE and LRE and writing measurable goals and progress monitoring and transition and all those things that go into.
Right.
And I think today we talked about special design instruction.
Talk about special
And
instruction
so,
today.
yes, so kind of fresh on our mind.
And so, that's just a big thing, is really understanding what is specially designed instruction and how does that, I'm going to do it, and that's what John O'Connor says, I'm going to do some of that specially designed instruction, but what is it that I'm doing? How do I really say this is what specially designed instruction? How do I select the strategies that I'm using, and how do I deliver it? So those are just the big pieces of explicit instruction. Like I said, I'm going to link you guys some videos to seeing Dr. Archer model some lessons. And once you see that, it'll make a lot more sense. That's a real helpful tool, is being able to just watch those videos. So we want this to be accessible to you anytime you're working on this. We want those links and those resources. Just like when Brenda was talking about a little bit ago about the schoolhouse document. If you're working on an IEP, we want you to have access to that schoolhouse document, or the IEP handbook, lesson plan handbook, and the IEP guidance document, because those are all supports for you. Those are all there to help you to better understand how to develop an IEP. And a compliant IEP, we want to have the best resources we can to support all teachers. So we'll just kind of take a look at a couple more slides. This one is talking about vocabulary instruction. And so Dr. Archer talks about, we use explicit instruction model for how we deliver instruction, but vocabulary instruction is just a critical component, especially for our students with disabilities. They come to us lots of times with a gap or a deficit already in vocabulary. And so that gap continues to grow as the complexity and the cognitive demand of the standards increase with the grade level, the vocabulary increases. And if our kids don't have that foundation in vocabulary, or they're not developing that skill, that just gradually grows. That gap grows.
And it's across the board, Dion. It's every area, whether it's math, science, social studies, English, whatever it might be. If you don't understand the vocabulary, then there's a disconnect.
That's right. And vocabulary is super important. So that's what, we need to have opportunities for kids to understand that vocabulary.
Pre-teaching.
Yeah, that's right, pre-teaching it. That's right. So how do we pre-teach that vocabulary? So if we know this is coming up and we're going to be working on this, what vocabulary is that critical vocabulary? And then we help kids with that. We let them do some vocabulary work around that. And we build that vocabulary for them. And that's going to be some of our general vocabulary, but our domain-specific vocabulary. Like you're talking about the content areas, you're going to have some domain-specific vocabulary. But vocabulary instruction is very, very important for our students, and how we explicitly teach that. So if you're teaching, you may have 10 vocabulary words from that unit. So you're going to work on maybe prioritizing what those vocabulary words are that the students might not know. So you're going to prioritize those first. You're going to teach those particular vocabulary words to the students. And then you're going to keep adding to that, but you're going to keep practicing the old vocabulary. So it's kind of like you're bringing in new vocabulary, you're practicing the old, but the kids are revisiting that vocabulary because they're going to have to see it multiple times to be able to retain it. So there's a whole nother section we'll talk about. You'll get access to that. If you guys say, hey, that's something we want some more training on, you just have to contact us at KVEC. That's something we do as part of that explicit instruction is vocabulary. And so if that's something we can help you with, we're happy to do that, or give you some more supports on that in any way we can. Does anybody have any questions? Comments? Good ideas on vocabulary instruction? So let's talk just a little bit then. This was what Deepa was talking about a little earlier, was this ready to go menu. And what we were talking about is, do you know some specific strategies that work well to work with students in reading? If you're working on reading comprehension, do you know some specific strategies to work with kids on basic reading skills? Like, do you have some strategies for phonemic awareness or for phonics? Do we have some specific strategies that we know for behavior? In math, what is it, some specific strategies that we use in math? And the reason, like Deepa was talking about, that if we already have kind of a house or a toolbox of tools that we know work for any particular kind of skill that we're teaching, we can quickly pull that out and start working with students on that. And that's how it'll help us with our progress monitoring. So say we're using a graphic organizer that in order to do capture some information on a reading, from a reading passage, and it's not even helping kids, then we got to stop doing that. But what can we immediately come back with a new strategy that would be helpful for a student? And so if we have those, if we kind of start building our own knowledge and understanding about some of the strategies, so you know you're going to have kids on your caseload that have reading deficits. We're going to have in basic reading, reading comprehension, reading fluency. So we know that we're going to be working in those areas. Math calculation, right? Behavior. What is the other one you had, Rita? The
Math reasoning.
Math reasoning. Functional skills.
Writing.
Written expression. So those are.
Write sentence, make construct sentences, construct paragraphs.
Right.
Get their thoughts on paper. Those types of things are real problems, particularly when you have reading problems. Kind of go hand in hand.
So that was the whole idea, is that we start building kind of a toolbox for ourselves. And you may just keep it in a notebook, or you may have it however you want to organize it. But if you're thinking about reading comprehension for my grade level, what is it that I can teach? What kind of strategies can I use for my students? And then you have those. And that way, if something's working for kids, you can see if it's working, or you may choose to never use that strategy again. I had a teacher one time talking about, she used a graphic organizer, a T-chart all the time in her class. Well, she used that, and she'd been using that T-chart for quite a while, until she finally figured out that T-chart really wasn't getting to the complexity of what kids needed to know. So she'd been using that T-chart for a long time as a graphic organizer, a way for kids to organize their thinking, but it really wasn't helping the kids. So again, that's what we have to kind of just build that. And that takes time and practice and working through that. But build those things as you go. And if those are you that are new teachers, those are good ways to start kind of just putting all your stuff together, organizing it. You can do it electronically, or make you folders on your computer, but have some strategies in place that you can just real quickly pull and help kids with. So and again, this slide's just talking about that metacognitive instruction. And, our kids don't have that ability to think about what they're thinking or think through that. And so we have to teach that. And then we do that through explicit instruction, through that modeling. And so you have to kind of just walk through it and talk kids through a lesson that way and model it. And this is what happens for our kids with disabilities. Our students with disabilities have trouble with these kind of things. And you'll probably look at these and you'll realize that these are in social situations. How about, if they're having multiple classes, and maybe they're teaching something real similar in social studies that they're doing in your reading class, but kids don't have the ability to transfer that learning across settings. And so that's how we kind of talk kids through that metacognitive process. But getting their work, and we know that, our OHI kids, and trying to keep up with their organization and their work, keeping their assignments. And a lot of times that's the biggest area, the biggest need that they have is just being able to organize. But, there's a lot to go that happens for that student. They're changing classes. And if you think about it, sometimes they may change classes 6 or 7 times a day. and trying to keep up with all of that and thinking through all of those. So it's real important that we just be cognizant of that, and we model and we talk kids through those skills that we want them to know. And that's the biggest thing with explicit instruction is it is so clear to the learner that there's no opportunity for misconception, that everything's clear. Your language is clear. You model exactly what you want them to do and exactly the process of that, and how it should look in that classroom, and talk about it. And then give kids opportunity to do it. But it's real clear, and that's what our kids need a lot of times. But anyway, you have access to that. And so these are just some more ideas about specially designed instruction and explicit instruction. But we'll take questions, or let's just stop here at the end for a few minutes and let you guys talk about what questions you might have, what needs that you might have. Next month, our conversation is going to be on behavior. So you can be thinking about that. But what is it, anything you want to talk about right now with specially designed instruction? Any questions you might have? Because you got Brenda and Deepa here that are due process that can help answer questions. We have Chastity here that's literacy. And I can help answer some literacy questions. So what questions might you have right now? And we'll just spend the next couple of minutes talking. And we're going to have to, we may have to call out names.
Well, I was just thinking, when you were talking about them getting strategies for their toolbox, as new teachers, that might be a question they may have is, okay, what general strategies would I need? They may not even have that. So if that's a question that you might have, then that's what we're here for as well. If you have questions on some strategies just to kind of get you started, then you can let us know, and we can help with that as well.
And and depending on what kind of program that you've been in or you're doing, or there may be some things that you have a lot more information about than other things. And so if you can let us know what you might need, we can set it up this way. I will take you guys through and let you guys see what this document is that we're working on here at Cadre for that you can use in the as far as being able to find resources and that kind of thing. So I am going to take you through that if anybody don't have any questions right this minute. But I'm going to show you this document that we've been working on, and I'm going to share it right here. You can find it on the holler, but I'm going to email you this link. But if you'll go back and if you want to look through this one has, like right here, it has the date, and this is what we talked about. Well, this is the link then to KDE's eligibility site, but this one gives you a video on the writing present levels. So if you've kind of stuck on present levels, or you want to really make sure you're doing a good job on it, you can go back and watch this video. This one will be one from Denny, Paul, and Brenda. And then here is the Zoom meeting. Just like today, we're just recording this meeting and the conversation, and you can go back and watch that Zoom meeting from back in September. The next time we talked was the Kentucky Academic Standards. So if you wanted to go straight to that website where the Kentucky Academic Standards are at, you just click that link right there. Over here gives you a YouTube video with Denny, Paul, and Brenda talking about FAPE. We're also talking about writing goals. And there's the link on that. And then there's a video talking about special factors. So in November, we talked about progress monitoring. And so you'll see right here is the progress monitoring. That's a Google Drive. That's the PowerPoint. Over here is the Zoom meeting, if you want to go back and watch that Zoom meeting. So we've talked to some of the directors in your districts, and so they're willing to work with us, and that we'll try to figure out a way you all can get a certificate to participate as you participate in the Zoom meetings. But you can go back anytime and go through any of these resources. So like today, the PowerPoint that's been on the screen about specially designed instruction is here. And over here is Denny, Paul, and Brenda's video, I believe, on explicit instruction. Specially designed instruction. And then there's another video down below on explicit instruction. And that one was Vonda Adams. So she's just talking about what is explicit instruction. So when you come back in, or you go to this link through the holler, you'll also see those added links for the videos with Anita Archer. So you'll be able to find that.
A lot of opportunity for repetition with a lot of the information.
Yeah. So you should be able to go back. Yeah.
Put your fingers on it.
Get back to it. Right. So if we were talking through it, and you didn't get, you missed a part of it, or you want to go back and learn some more about it, all those links are right there.